Well, I bet by now you've heard the news. This September, Tim Cook will be stepping down as CEO of Apple, and John Ternus will be replacing him. I don't want to brag and say I pretty much predicted this exactly down to the month that it would happen last year. If you haven't seen that video, you should go watch it because it does provide some important context. And over the next few months, we will talk about who John Ternus is, what he will mean to Apple, and the incredible pressure that will be placed upon him because Tim Cook is, by no uncertain terms, one of the greatest American CEOs of all time. But I figured today, we should just focus on Tim Cook and his legacy, the stuff he did amazing and the stuff that he totally sucked at over his tenure as CEO. And what better way to do that than a tier list, baby? Oh, we're starting off with the sexy stuff, dividends and buybacks, baby. Look, Jobs hated dividends. He famously said that Apple would rather have money to invest in product than to give money back to investors. The problem is he invented the iPhone, and very quickly Apple became the most cash liquid company on the planet. They had the biggest cash pile reserve in corporate history, and they were doing nothing with it. Cook comes into office and pretty much immediately reverses that. And it's made a lot of people really, really rich. Warren Buffett's entire Apple thesis over the last 15 years has essentially been, I don't have to buy more shares of Apple because Tim Cook just buys them for me. Berkshire's ownership percentage grows every quarter and they literally do nothing. They haven't had to spend a dime. Now, there is a valid criticism against dividends and buybacks. Buybacks are financial engineering. They're not innovation. And the $800 billion plus that have gone back to shareholders since Cook took office could have gone to funding a bunch of crazy stuff that they didn't, like moonshots. But the dividend is what made Apple, I think, investable for retirement funds and income portfolios. It widened the shareholder base enormously, and it is a big reason for which Apple as a stock became the defensive flight to quality stock that it is now. Whether or not you are a fan of buybacks and dividends, this was pretty integral to Apple's growth. So I'm gonna give this like a solid B. Not very sexy, but important. Speaking of sexy, Apple Maps, a complete disaster. This is a famous, famous story. Scott Forstall was kind of the collateral damage in all this. And that ended up being, I think, kind of a problem because look, Forstall was famously a dick. He was like mini Steve. He was combative with Jony Ive, with Bob Mansfield, with Eddie Q. He rubbed the entire executive leadership team the wrong way, and none of that is disputed. But he was also, in my opinion, kind of one of the last Apple executives with a true Jobs lineage product mind. He ran iOS from the original iPhone through iOS 6. He hired the iOS team that built everything. He set the foundations of the App Store, which I found out recently he kind of ended up doing behind Steve Jobs' back. Pretty crazy. He was the one pushing the hardest on product ambition, while Cook was kind of in the background optimizing operations. Apple Maps launched, it's Forstall's baby, it's a disaster. We all know the story, it's a complete joke. And Cook goes to Forstall and says, look, you need to apologize. And Forstall says, no. So Cook fires him, and firing him was probably the right short-term PR move, but it was probably the biggest long-term loss that Apple has taken in the last 15 years. And I would argue that every subsequent Apple software stumble, like iTunes bloat, the App Store disaster, skeuomorphism overcorrection, Siri stagnation, Apple intelligence cast, like a lot of that traces back to not having a Forstall caliber product antagonist in the room. And I love Federighi, but I just do not think he is that. And part of me hopes that Federighi does not kind of go through this executive transition. I'm hoping that in a few years, he kind of goes away. We need a John Ternus of software, and Federighi is not that. And Forstall was. So yeah, Apple Maps sucked. They lost the important guy, and this was just a blunder all the way through. It's a D. Apple Maps today is pretty good, but that's not what we're talking about. All right, the Apple Watch. Oh boy. This was the first product that released from Apple that Jobs did not have a hand in. It was not remotely the first wearable, but it kind of came to define the category. It wasn't an enormous hit at launch, by the way. We should be clear about that. It was expensive, especially the ridiculous $10,000 and $18,000 gold and rose gold edition models. Yeah. What I would like for you to do is watch this video all the way through. It's great. But after that, go watch the original Apple Watch keynote because it is bizarre. They so did not understand what it would become when they launched it. Health has become the near sole focus of the Apple Watch, initially for fitness, but later for legitimate medical purposes. Like the Series 4, it did more to legitimize the product than I think the original 2015 launch because it had ECG and fall detection that made this thing feel medically real and prudent. And it's only continued since then. We've got crash protection, we've got AFib, we've got apnea, we've got hypertension detection, blood oxygen, etc. Apple Watch literally saves lives. And as much as I make fun of their marketing every time they do a dramatic video of people saying like, oh, I was almost dead, and then the Apple Watch saved, It's true. It really does. The category has slowed. It's a little stagnant. It needs some change, but it's been a winner for over a decade. It's been an incredibly successful product, would make Apple a Fortune 40 company all on its own. And it's got to be A tier. Sorry, I can't give you an S, but it's really, really, really important. Okay, next up, the iPhone 6. In 2010, Jobs said on stage, no one's going to buy a big phone because you can't get your hand around it. Wow, that aged like milk. Because Cook comes in a couple years later and ships a 5.5-inch phone. Well, I guess it's 4 years later. And this is Cook's kind of first public overruling of his predecessor's design philosophy. And it's arguably the first time he did so at scale. When it happened, there were reports that even within Apple, it was divisive, but China was a huge, huge market that was growing very quickly, and they demanded big phones. And Cook was adamant, allegedly behind the scenes, that they needed a big phone. And well, he was vindicated when it became the biggest sales cycle in the company's history. If you want one clear example of Cook kind of taking over and taking the helm, this is it. And the scale is honestly hard to overstate. I mean, Apple sold 4 million units in the first 24 hours of pre-orders alone, more than the entire first year of the original iPhone sales. Fiscal year 2015 revenue hit $223 billion, up 28% year over year. Profit was $53 billion. At the time, the largest annual profit of any company in any industry had ever reported in human history. Like, holy crap. And it was set on the back of this phone. And the strategic consequence of this exists today. I mean, every phone has been big, and every small phone Apple's tried has been a failure. We're getting an even bigger folding phone next year. The iPhone 6 and subsequent iPhone launches, like this was an S-tier decision. It needed to happen. And boy, was it important. Okay, Apple Pay. Big whoop. Cook signed individual deals with Visa, MasterCard, American Express, and the 6 biggest US banks before launch. It was the first non-financial operator to do so, and I do think that shows how savvy Cook was at getting this navigated. This was not a tech company that was kind of trying to approach financial institutions. I mean, it was, but in a way that only Apple could have done. They do get some upside to this, by the way. They get 0.15% of credit card transactions, and they're paid for by banks, not merchants, which is not much money, only $4 to $9 billion per year in pure high margin revenue, doing basically nothing. But what it really did is it accelerated fraud reduction. Because it was tokenized. They introduced the idea that, yeah, when we beam your credit card information over NFC, it's just a one-time use card number. It's not a raw card number like you'd find on cards of the era. And it was a rare case where Apple's walled garden produced genuine good results for public good and became the industry norm. And I would also say that Apple Pay pretty much single-handedly pushed the US towards contactless adoption. That said, it's pretty boring. But then again, I don't even have my wallet in my back pocket right now because I only use Apple Pay and Apple Wallet with like IDs and stuff. Okay, I'm changing my mind. This is like a B tier. B as in boring, but boy, important. Project Titan. Yeah, remember this? You might not even know about this. It was Apple's car project, a decade of work, $10 billion, zero shipped product. And well, on one hand, this is the thing that I actually think Cook got right. He knew when to cut his losses on something that was not going to be Apple caliber rather than try to ship something crappy. But the churn in leadership was like a red flag. You had Steve Zadesky, who was out. Bob Mansfield came in. Doug Field came in from Tesla. Kevin Lynch ended up taking over at some point. Field goes to Ford, and then Lynch leaves too. It's just a disaster. And every 18 months, like the whole entire what is this changes. Is it going to be software for cars? Is it going to be full self-driving stack? Is it going to be a literal car? It changed like 50 times over 10 years. The real issue, I think, is that Apple just didn't want to accept automotive margins. They sucked. Cars run 10 to 20% on a good day, 20% if you're Tesla. And that's coming from a company that is used to, at minimum, like a 30 to 40% margin. So yeah, Apple quit. They called it quits, and it was probably a good time. It lasted 10 years. They finally ended things in 2024, and they took all the engineers that remained and poured them into Apple Intelligence. So wait, maybe Project Titan wasn't the problem. It was just all the engineers that worked on it and now Apple Intelligence. But I do think that there have been good side effects from this because much of the auto industry picked up their kind of people. Rivian is one such player. And I think a lot of the great software that has shipped in cars over the last couple of years in many ways can be attributed to Project Titan. So I'm going to give this a solid D. It sucked. Okay, SwiftUI and Swift. Open sourcing Swift in 2015 was absolutely the move. It signaled to Apple that they wanted like a modern developer relationship, not this Objective-C walled garden that was some weird holdover from Next Step, a modern object-oriented language designed to be used by people. And make no mistake, the first couple of years were rough. Teams stayed on UIKit because SwiftUI wasn't production ready. It wasn't ready for complex apps. And in many ways, that's still kind of debatable for the hardest cases. But the strategic win is that it was cross-platform. One framework powers watchOS and visionOS and macOS and everything else, and no other company has that kind of coherence. Chris Latner, who was the guy behind Swift, left Apple in 2017, but I think it's notable that Apple's most important language outlived its creator's departure without any drift whatsoever. And SwiftUI's rate of breaking changes per year is higher than any other Apple framework should have. Developers pay the cost of the changes every WWDC, but it is what enables the platform to be what it is to us, the users. And so while I am not a developer and thus will rank it A, and probably no other developer will have done that, boy, it was a big deal, especially for the Mac, which was atrophying quickly. And SwiftUI and Swift have basically saved macOS. What is this? It says super secret. Oh, that's today's sponsor, Dreamy. Look, there are two kinds of fans in the world. The ugly kind you hide behind the couch because it's ugly, and the kind that tries hard not to be ugly but ends up looking like a prop from a 2008 sci-fi movie. Except for, well, the Dreamy MF10 is nothing like that. It's the first bladeless fan that I've tested that actually looks like something that I would put in my room on purpose. It's in my set, and you didn't even notice because it looks so handsome. Now, two things that make this different from other bladeless fans you've probably seen are first, the air boost system, which pulls in ambient air and increases its velocity and throughput to multiply the output by nearly 16 times. Nearly 1,000 cubic feet per minute come out of those nozzles. It is crazy. It can cool a 430 square foot room in about 4 minutes, and it throws air over 42 feet. Look how well this receipt paper is moving from super, super far away. Second, and this is the part that does look mildly interstellar, the 6-axis gyro wing head. It oscillates horizontally like a normal fan, but it also sweeps vertically at the same time. And you get a really nice spread. So instead of like a narrow beam pointed at one specific body part, you get actual room-wide circulation. Think like a spotlight versus a lamp. A few other things worth mentioning. The temp sync sensor auto-adjusts speed based on your ambient temperature in the room, so it slows down as it gets cooler. The remote snaps magnetically onto the body so it doesn't vanish into the couch cushion. It runs around 30 decibels on low speed. It's very, very quiet. And the whole thing wipes clean in one pass because there's no cage full of dust to disassemble. The sale link and discount code are in the video description. And well, get the Dreamy MF10 today before summer make things too hot and you want to die. Next. Services is an insane category because while it isn't that much revenue, only about $109 billion per year, it is not just Apple's most profitable category, it makes up most of Apple's net margin because it's just sheer revenue. And the press release from Apple literally credits this as Tim's greatest achievement to Apple. And while true, I also think it's kind of sad because while you're looking at these icons going, oh yeah, I like Apple Music and Apple TV is pretty good too. Those are lies. This category comes from basically two things, and they're not value adds to consumers. It comes from rent seeking via the App Store, taking 30% off of every transaction, and the $20 billion a year Google search deal, which is just sheer profit. The source of much of the antitrust legislation and backlash against Apple in recent years is because of this. Apple has pushed these numbers, and it's come to be a consequence of them just trying to extract value at every turn from every existing platform instead of improving and creating new ones. And that's a shame. We'll talk about some of these individual services later on because they're not bad. But again, this is not really the services category. The services category is money, and the money is big, and it's really just an ugly, gross thing. I'm going to put this D, honestly, maybe F tier. I can't do F just because the services inside that we care about are pretty nice. One of my favorite services, Apple Music. Look, iTunes owned 80% of the digital music market at its peak. Spotify launched in 2008 and Jobs did nothing. He actually famously said of Spotify, subscriptions are the music service model of the past. People want to own their music. Well, that was wrong, and Cook shipped the opposite 5 years later. I think buying Beats at $3 billion was the capitulation. This was also a Jobs acquisition. I'm rolling this into Google Music because even though Beats still exists and they sell headphones, they bought it for the talent. Apple couldn't build streaming internally fast enough, so they just bought the team behind it. They bought Jimmy Iovine, Dr. Dre, Trent Reznor, and all of the infrastructure that came with Beats Music, which was originally Mog and then became Apple Music. More importantly, this kind of Apple Music served as the proof of concept for what would become this enormous services category. In addition to paying artists more, the lossless spatial audio push has been Apple's main lever to differentiate, all without price hikes, and I think it's great. They are now the highest resolution streamer at the lowest price, all while paying artists the highest price. Spotify is not doing that. I hate Spotify. They suck. I know people like their algorithm and their radio. Apple Music is a better product in like every regard other than maybe recommendations. And it turns out they can be better to artists and they can be cheaper to us and we can get a higher end product because, well, when it's just a hobby instead of your entire business, you can afford to do that. I love Apple Music and the library management system because as an old boomer that likes to listen to complete albums all the way through, nothing is better at that than Apple Music. This is an easy A tier for me. Not S tier because like they were late to market and like it's not that innovative, but it's a good product. The butterfly keyboard. Oh boy, the butterfly keyboard. Ive's thinness obsession was the root cause, and Ive being completely unrestrained was Cook's fault. The butterfly mechanism existed because the scissor switches were 0.5 millimeter too tall in the 2015 MacBook and 2016 MacBook Pro. That's the whole story. Well, other than the fact that they kept shipping it for years, knowing that it was defective, and making minor revisions that they knew wouldn't fix the root problem, but would just slightly delay the inevitable. And it kicked off this whole like pro user rebellion. During the Hackintosh era where their machines were throttling, you had the butterfly keyboards, you had the touch bar, soldered RAM, dongles. It was bad. And it wasn't until the 2021 M1 MacBook Pro where we kind of got Apple's explicit apology tour. It is arguably the worst hardware product that Apple has shipped this century. Easy F tier. Frick you, butterfly keyboard. iPad Pro and the Apple Pencil. Okay, this is kind of a weird one because while the iPad did launch under Jobs' tenure and it was Jobs' like idealistic future computer, Tim Cook really took that idea and embodied it. It's one of the reasons why the Macs were so dog crap for so many years because Tim and team really thought the iPad was the future of computing. It kind of hasn't been, but in a way, it ended up being really successful because the iPad is a better selling computer than the Mac. This is the kind of the third clean example, in my opinion, of Cook overruling Jobs' dogma. Because Steve Jobs famously says, oh, nobody wants to use styluses. Well, Tim Cook ships one, and it is a massive commercial success, primarily for artists, but also for students and note-taking. And the hardware is incredible, not just the Apple Pencil and Apple Pencil Pro, but the iPad Pro behind it. I mean, the M4 iPad Pro and M5 iPad Pro, when they got the tandem OLED displays, when I saw that for the first time, I was like, you've got to be kidding me. They got it before any Mac, they got it before any iPhone, they got it first, and it is the best screen today, even still, that I own in my house. My honest assessment of this whole situation is that kind of Cook shipped the most ambitious product and tablet in history, but they didn't have the software behind it to match it. And I think the hardware team, Ternus, keeps delivering, and the software team, Federighi, keeps refusing. And boy, I hope they change that. But on hardware alone, I've got to give this at least an A tier, maybe B tier. I mean, it's so good. I love my iPad Pro, but iPadOS, it looks good in B tier. Privacy. Okay, where do we start with this one? App tracking transparency is arguably the single most consequential privacy move in the history of the consumer internet. I'm not kidding. Meta told investors that it cost them roughly $10 billion in revenue on the first year alone because Apple prevented them from spying on Apple's own users. One toggle buried in iOS settings effectively gut-punched the entire cross-app ad tracking industry. Great. Snap, Twitter, YouTube, they all took visible hits, and Zuckerberg reportedly considered suing Apple over it, but didn't because it would have dragged Facebook's own disgusting mess into the waters. This all started because of the San Bernardino shooting. It's kind of a footnote that everyone forgets, but it was a horrible mass shooting. 14 people died. The FBI ultimately wanted Apple to unlock the phones to provide a backdoor. Apple said no. The FBI pays a third party. They can't figure out how to do it. They can't crack it. And well, the iPhone becomes the device that protects your security, and the company behind it just refuses to be anchored to the idea that there will be backdoors at all. They don't hold the key. And that became marketing language that the company has leaned into ever since. And Cook has really kind of compartmentalized this as one of Apple's important moral things that they have to do. Private cloud compute is quietly the next ambitious evolution of this from a security engineering standpoint. They published the actual production server images for outside bounties to kind of tear apart, and they offered up to $1 million in vulnerability. Nobody's doing anything close to that. And I do think it's worth keeping the cynical lens a little bit handy. Privacy is also a huge strategic moat to Apple. It's the one axis where Google and Meta structurally can't compete because their business models forbid it. They're both advertising companies. Apple's a hardware company. And it just so happens that kind of principle and positioning happen to align perfectly, which is convenient, but it's really, really good. And this is an easy S tier, in my opinion. They continue to fight against legislation for banning encryption. Cook has done a great job with this. Boy, the AirPods, where do we start with these? Announced in September 2016, they didn't ship until 4 months later in December, and they were widely out of stock for a long time. There was not very good supply. There were some QC issues at the beginning. It was a big problem. And this is all memory hold in people's kind of mind because they just don't remember the ramp up to AirPods. AirPods were not successful when they launched. Everybody made fun of them. SNL did sketches out the wazoo about how useless they looked. Every tech reviewer, including me, was somewhat skeptical. But then W1 pairing hit, where you just stuck them in your ears and they went from your iPhone to your Mac to your iPad and everywhere else, and the entire conversation was over in like a week. And then the AirPods Pro launched. And it was over for everybody else. I'm not kidding when I say that the AirPods Pro are probably my favorite product that Apple has made since the original iPhone, and probably second only to that iPhone in the entire 21st century. They are perfect in almost every single way. The AirPods Pro are exceptional. The AirPods are exceptional. The AirPods Max are pretty okay. Watch my review on that. And that was squarely a Tim Cook thing. Wow. S tier, no doubt about it. Fabulous product. Now we got to talk about the headphone jack. Part of the reason why I think the AirPods might have existed. Phil Schiller comes up on stage and he says, courage to remove the headphone jack. It was a meme because it was a stupid thing to stay on stage. Afterwards, they kind of said, well, we did it because of water resistance, because the iPhone 7 shipped with IP67 water resistance as the reason for which they couldn't have a headphone jack. But that was complete BS. The Samsung Galaxy S7 shipped 6 months before the iPhone 7 with a headphone jack and a higher rating, IP68 versus 67. Sony and others had been shipping like waterproof phones with headphone jacks for years. The physics of sealing the 3.5 millimeter hole at the bottom, they were a solved problem. Apple just didn't want to do it. And the real reason behind it was not courage. It was almost certainly accessory revenue. Lightning Audio was a closed MFI licensed ecosystem. Every third-party headphone maker who wanted to plug into the iPhone had to pay Apple. And well, then they launched AirPods, which they also wanted to be the knockout punch. But I have to be honest, looking back in retrospect, was it that big of a deal? The $9 Lightning to 3.5 millimeter DAC was actually fine. It worked pretty good. Yeah, I mean, I think this is, it speaks for itself. Pretty stupid decision, but in retrospect, over the last 10 years, have I really cried that much about the headphone jack? Not really. I don't think about it. C tier. The touch bar. The touch bar. Here's the thing. You have to decouple the touch bar from what the disastrous computer that it was placed on was. It was mired by those computers because the touch bar itself wasn't that bad of an opinion. Having a digital escape key was very stupid, but everything else about the touch bar was kind of cool, and it gets dragged because nobody liked the computers that they were on. The idea wasn't dumb. A contextual input strip that changes per app is actually pretty clever. The problem is that it was a solution in search of a problem. A lot of people loved the touch bar. I didn't. But there were no haptics. It meant you had to look down when you used it. It was a kind of a nightmare. Third-party adoption was basically zero, and then Apple never really iterated upon it. They had a decent idea at the beginning. They put it in a couple key apps, and then they're like, okay, we're done. And that was it. So, yeah, this is a D. It's bad. Not a bad idea, really bad execution. It's not as bad as Apple Retail. Angela Ahrendts, I'm sure you're a good person, but I hate you. This is the one Cook decision that I just cannot defend in any way. Apple Retail under Ron Johnson was the greatest retail operation in the world. It had the highest sales per square foot of any retailer in any industry, and the service was genuinely excellent. Cook hires a Burberry executive to run it because, oh, what could be better than that? Well, everything. It tells you exactly the direction Apple wanted to take it. I think this might have been Jony Ive influence because this is around the time that they're about ready to sell a $10,000 and $18,000 watch. And Angela Ahrendts, God bless her, turned stores into fashion boutiques. They replaced the idea of stores with like this open plaza concept. But the biggest thing was that in 2017, they ended the in-person genius training in Cupertino. When you became an Apple genius, you used to have to go to California. It was a rite of passage. You'd stay there for 2 to 3 weeks and you would repair stuff. You would take Macs apart in a mock genius bar. You got the culture directly injected into your veins. You were trained. As of 2017, it's been a self-guided Atlas web seminar in the back room of your store. There's no physical hardware, they're virtual take-aparts. And so the downstream effect is pretty much exactly what you'd predict. And no better example of this is my iMac Pro. Few repairs are done in store, you get worse diagnosis, and when a repair does need to happen, geniuses are oftentimes never really trained. The genius working on your Mac, they're doing for the first time. The old kind of idea where a genius could use his own kind of judgment to determine whether or not a replacement was warranted is not. It now falls under specific and precisely calculated, qualifications. It sucks. Apple stores suck. I'm sad. Every time I go in there, I freaking regret it. The people in Apple stores, great people, but wow, Apple retail went from being a total S tier to like D tier at best. Then again, it is better than pretty much any other brand, so I'm gonna leave it at C tier, but it's bad. I mean, like literally HP, Dell's a better example. Dell, you can call Dell and they will come to your house and fix your computer same day under warranty. But then if you have a $10,000 computer at Apple, they're like, oh, you have to set up an appointment, we have to diagnose it. Well, you go walk around the mall for 2 hours while we look at it, and you're like, no, can you just like freaking call me? I'm gonna stop, I just hate them. AirPower. This is a rare case of Apple announcing a product that they couldn't actually build. The multi-coil free placement concept ran too hot and at the density Apple wanted. It wasn't reliable. And we went in this awkward phase where there was just 18 months of public silence. They teased it. They didn't just tease it. Like it was legitimately in the manual on the iPhone XS. They're like, oh, you can use AirPower. But it went completely against the idea that they only ship when they're ready. And because they weren't like sure that they were going to kill it, they just didn't talk about it. It was there and you ask about AirPower and Apple wouldn't comment. And then just one day it disappears. They don't say like, we're killing AirPower, it didn't work. It's just gone and everybody forgets it. This is a Jony Ive thing. This is a signature failure on his end, but also, I mean, Cook signed off on it. He was in charge of it. It was a total disaster. AirPower is an F. F for funny, because it's so stupid. Okay, Batterygate. Oh boy. This was also a problem. Remember that thing where Apple was throttling older iPhones to protect the batteries, or so they claimed? Well, the engineering rationale was real. Aging lithium batteries can't sustain the peak current required, and so phones would just shut off under load. It was a problem. Maybe a problem of their own making, but it was a problem. And so they tried to quietly thermally throttle them, power throttle them to avoid these shutdowns. The scandal wasn't doing this, it was just the silence. Apple shipped this in iOS 10.2.1 and didn't say anything. They didn't tell anybody. They were actually asked about it once and denied it to the press and then confirmed it only after Geekbench founder John Poole published data showing that it like provably was a thing. It was a classic Apple communications failure. If they had framed it up front as like, we're keeping your aging phone usable, and here's a replacement battery program if you want to replace it, it would have been a feature. Instead, it was read as forced planned obsolescence, and the blowback was disaster. It forced Apple to ship battery health in iOS 11, which didn't come for like a year after the initial controversy, and that ended up being great for users. It was kind of a silver lining, but only a silver lining to a self-inflicted crisis. It was so bad that Cook's apology was rare and it was clean. He straight up owned up to it in a public letter. He said it was a miss and that they were going to fix it. That was one of his better PR moves to kind of recoup the disaster, but it was a disaster. This is an F tier, just total blunder. Face ID. The opposite of a blunder, genuinely great tech. Apple's trued up sensor array was released with the iPhone X. It was 2 to 3 years ahead of any Android equivalent and honestly remains so in most ways because it's using a real dot projector. It's actually mapping the 3D depth of your face rather than just using an RGB camera. The mask era was kind of where it started to kind of come down a little bit. 2017 through 2020, good, but then COVID comes around and suddenly millions of people are forced to type pins into their phone because it doesn't work with the mask. They quickly ship a patch to make the Apple Watch unlock it. Great if you own an Apple Watch, but not if you don't. They finally end up shipping mask support within Face ID after COVID's basically already over. The end of 2021. Yeah. The stealth loss, I think, was Touch ID. It's Touch ID on Macs, on keyboards, on iPads is legitimately worse than almost any fingerprint sensor on an Android phone. And it's because they just let it atrophy, they didn't care about it, and they just shipped Face ID, but only on the devices that matter, not on their cheap devices, not on their Macs. So Face ID is an A-tier product, but everything else that followed, not great. iPhone 10. I mean, how can this be anything other than S tier, man? This is the biggest design swing of Cook's entire tenure. Apple redesigned their most successful product history like in one cycle. Nobody else really does that. The gesture language is the undersold part. Swipe to go home, swipe for multitasking, swipe for control center, all swipes, all invented here, all standard now on both iOS and Android. It took Android years to copy iOS. They did a crappy copy in the beginning, it was awful, and then it came around, it got better. And even Apple's own gestures were better. Remember, like you used to have to swipe up and hold in order to actually access the multitasking launcher? The bezels are kind of the real story though. Other phones at the time had teardrop notches and kind of parcel reductions of screen real estate, but nothing really came close to the iPhone X's edge-to-edge bezel, particularly because Apple pulled that off by folding the display controller underneath the OLED at the bottom, which required custom display orders in enormous volumes that nobody else could really match. It was a hardware flex that Android OEMs honestly couldn't replicate for years. Remember where all the bezels were slightly different? Like they were thinner on the top and the sides, but then thicker the bottom. No, Apple had it right from day one. And yeah, it meant that they had the notch. It was genuinely ugly, but it was the right choice. They made the cutout a feature instead of hiding it in shame like Android manufacturers are putting it in a pop-up camera that would break. And well, the dynamic island is just an evolution of that. Cook's bet was that customers would pay $300 more, that they would pay $1,000 for a phone, and they absolutely have. The entire industry has followed suit. Now, almost every phone that is flagship is over $1,000, and that is because of the iPhone 10, and what a great phone it was. Easy S tier. No problem about it. Tim Cook and Donald Trump. You didn't think we could get out of this video without a little bit of controversy, right? Look, this is uniquely Cook. No other Silicon Valley CEO has played the DC game as well as Tim Cook for as long as he has. Jobs had no interest in Washington. Cook thrives in it. He's made it part of the job. It's one of the reasons why he's staying on as executive chairman, so he can do it instead of Ternus, because nobody probably in the world does it better than him. The first term with Trump is kind of forgotten. You might recall that the iPhone was specifically exempted from the original 2019 China tariffs through direct personal lobbying from Tim Cook. Because of that, Apple's stock materially outperformed like pretty much all competition because Cook knew how to talk to Trump. Trump, even today, speaks very positively of Tim Cook. Now, you might say that's because things have gotten more fraught. I mean, with the inauguration appearance, personal donation of $1 million to Trump's campaign, $500 billion in the U.S. investment pledge, which was kind of headed by Donald Trump. I mean, it's for supply chain protections against all of the crazy tariffs that are coming out. And the tension here is because Cook has been publicly vocal on LGBTQ issues and climate and immigration, DACA, all of the positions that this current administration actively opposes. But Tim Cook still plays ball, and he has a good relationship with Trump, and Trump likes him. It's this pragmatism on compromise that depends on where you sit, and he sits at the helm of one of the world's most valuable companies, and the truth is that this strategy works. I mean, Apple's gotten tariff carve-outs, they've gotten manufacturing flexibility, they've gotten a softer regulation touch than Meta or Google, particularly when it comes to antitrust. This is Cook's operator brain at its most visible. He's a supply chain guy, he's a people guy. Washington is just another supply chain of people to manage, and whether or not you like or dislike Trump's politics, I personally hate him. You can't argue with the fact that that Cook has just absolutely mastered it. It's an A tier at minimum, probably S tier. Trump's down here. Cook is like right here, but the relationship together, well, is also down here, but you know what I mean. Okay, the HomePod. Oh boy. Yeah. It originally launched 2018, $350. The price was insane. The sound quality was genuinely class-leading, but it didn't matter because Siri couldn't do half of what Alexa could. Amazon trained the market on a bunch of $50 Echo devices, and well, $350 years afterwards was not going to be a success. It was a DOA product. HomePod Mini launches after that, after the failure that is the original HomePod. It's $99, a little bit more accessible price, still too expensive, but Apple sells them, quite well because they determined, oh, actually, most people don't care about audio quality. It's like the iPod Hi-Fi all over again. And then like 2 years later, Apple's like, just kidding, we're doing it again. And they made it cheaper, but they also made the sound quality worse, and it wasn't any better because it was still powered by Siri, and it still sucks today because it's powered by Siri. And all of the Apple Intelligence features, by the way, that like are empowered by having like on-edge compute, not present in the HomePod because they moved from having A series silicon in the original HomePod to the Apple Watch S series chip that's just not powerful enough to do any of that on-edge compute. And so Apple Intelligence sucks on the HomePod too, and it will continue to. Siri is bad on the HomePod. I don't even ask anymore unless it's for automation because it just says, oh, you can ask again from your iPhone. Bad product. D. Good product. Apple TV. This is a mea culpa moment, okay? I got this one super wrong. At launch, I called it a vanity project that didn't have a library, no catalog, no reason to subscribe, and that it would get absolutely murdered by Disney+. And well, that's kind of true, the last part, but it was all of the three things that I didn't think it would be, and then Apple just kept shipping good stuff. The batting average on Apple TV is remarkable. A few shows are exceptional. Severance, The Studio, Pluribus, like really top tier stuff. A bunch are genuinely great. Go say that about Netflix or Prime Video, heck, even HBO and Disney. Not gonna happen. This is the modern HBO. It's like not a metaphor, it's genuinely the same playbook. Small catalog, maximum curation. Every show has the prestige moment. They'd rather have 40 great shows than 400 mid ones. Here's the thing, commercially, it's a failure. Apple is losing over $1 billion a year on Apple TV Plus and has been for years. Severance Season 2 cost $200 million. That's Netflix tier spending, but with a fraction of the subscriber base. And well, Tim Cook just keeps writing the checks. I think he has a long-term bet on this ecosystem, but I also think that Apple just genuinely cares about this. They've won awards like wildly, over 2,500 nominations and 500 wins in 6 years, which is the highest award per subscriber ratio of any streamer by a massive margin. And it's also only had one price increase. It's $13 a month, which whereas everything else is like freaking $30 now. Great service, A tier for sure. Now we get to the Apple Card. Ooh, big whoop. Okay. A titanium credit card was what originally got all the headlines. The real product was kind of the daily cash, 2% back everywhere else, 3% at the Apple Store, wrapped inside Apple Wallet. It was a genuinely good UI, and it also provided really good transparency for people that didn't have very good credit card discipline. Thing is, Goldman Sachs was the wrong partner. They had no consumer banking muscle. They got hammered by the CFPB over dispute handling, and they bled a ton of money on it to the point where they're now out of the game and JP Morgan's going to take over. It tells you that Apple kind of underestimated how hard consumer finance really is. And even though the Apple Wallet integration was great, if you were a real serious card user, it was a frustration. They have this web portal that freaking sucks. Until literally this year, you could only export your statements as a PDF. That's it. If you wanted a CSV, if you wanted a QuickBooks file, you had to do it from your iPhone, not anywhere else, and freaking airdrop them to your computer. It's insane. Look, it's a mid-credit card, and it going to JP Morgan probably won't change that much because they have their own mid-credit cards. It's not even the best free credit card. Frankly, the only thing that it does well is integrate with the phone and kind of tell you in clear English what's due and when. But yeah, who cares? C? Does it even deserve C? Yeah, it's fine. It's completely unoffensive. Apple Arcade. Cook and Apple fundamentally do not understand games. This is the clearest example of that. They run the biggest gaming platform on earth, and they have nothing to show for it culturally. Look, mobile is where half of all gaming revenue lives. Apple sits at the toll booth collecting 30% of everything coming through the App Store. They own gaming revenue and have basically zero identity in it. And Arcade is proof of that misunderstanding. The whole no ads, no in-app purchase is a principled pitch, and I don't mind it, but it's mostly aimed at parents, not really at gamers. Gamers don't want a curated tier indie puzzle game selection. They want the hits, they want communities, they want the competitive ladders, they want live services, all of which Apple Arcade ignores. There's no first-party studios, no Apple franchise. There's no Apple equivalent of Halo or Mario or Uncharted, and heaven knows they could afford it. Sony, Nintendo, Microsoft, everybody else all figured out years ago that the platform plus the exclusive IP is the flywheel that you need to keep going. And Apple's like, well, we just got the platform and we make a ton of money, so it's good, right? There are people at Apple that do care, and I wonder if Ternus is one of them, because the Mac gaming story is kind of the same sin, but in a different shape. Apple Silicon is genuinely great gaming hardware, and the game porting toolkit is genuinely impressive. There are people that care at Apple. The thing is that there's just no consistent platform push. The guys at the tippy top that have control haven't done that, aka Cook. There's no publisher relationships, there's no marketing. Every WWDC, they announce like 2 AAA ports, they bring Hideo Kojima up on stage and they're like, wow, look, and then nothing happens for a year. There's so much potential left on the table. Apple Arcade is mid at best. I'm gonna give it like a C because it is what it says it's going to be, but it's not good. Maybe I put this in D. I might change that in a minute. All right, we're getting near the end here. Oh, no, we're not. Jony Ives' departure. Look, Ive is probably the greatest industrial designer of all time, but he needs editing, and Cook was not the guy to do it. The worst products Apple released in the last 15 years were unrestrained Ive. The "we'll keep working together" framing after Ive left was like pure optics. Cook said Apple would remain Love From's primary client. I don't think that ever happened. They kind of quietly parted ways in 2022. Ive went to go do the Ferrari stuff, and now he's at OpenAI. Look, Jony was done, Tim was done. Neither wanted to say it out loud because the optics of that was bad, and the Jobs Ive Cook kind of trinity was load-bearing mythology inside of this freaking flywheel. But dissolving it publicly, while not the right choice, while not what they did was probably the right choice. The post-Ive era has been so much better. I mean, the M1 MacBook Pro brought back ports, MagSafe, real keyboard, it's so much better. And while Ternus is the hardware guy, you did lose some really important people. Evans, Hankey, a lot of the other really top-tier design people at Apple, I was gonna say design guys, she's a woman, went with Ive to Love From because Ive is the Jobs of design. But based on everything we're seeing coming out of Apple, they've still got a lot of people at Apple that know how to design stuff, and I like the stuff way better. The departure was what it was. It happened. It should have happened a lot sooner, but the way that it happened, I think, was fine, and I'm glad that Apple didn't keep working with Ive. They needed to freaking cut it out. Apple Silicon. I mean, are you freaking kidding me? This is Cook's Arc de Triomphe, and I think it is second only to the iPhone in Apple's entire 21st century history. Look, Rosetta 2 was the underappreciated bridge that helped this transition feel easy. Apple hit almost all of the pain. You were running Intel binaries, you didn't even realize it, and because of SwiftUI and other frameworks, it made the need for Rosetta 2 pretty minimal, and it was obsoleted quickly. I mean, it's next year that it's already slated to be deprecated. The volume that Apple was doing just made them TSMC's largest customer, and new processes and new generational improvements continue to be massive generation over generation. I often see Jobs cited as the reason for Apple Silicon because like Saruji came to Apple in 2008, and PA Semi was an acquisition that Apple did, I think, in 2010, 2011. The A4 followed, but like, no. This is Cook to meteoric heights. This is complete verticality and manufacturing prowess in volumes that only Cook can manage. He is the reason Apple Silicon is a thing, and boy, Apple Silicon is absolutely incredible. S tier, S plus, S triple S. Apple 2030 kind of is the real deal. I don't know that any CEO would be able to navigate the waters that Cook has had to navigate with as much care for the environment as Cook has shown. Now, I say that with an asterisk because he is the CEO of Apple before he is a lover of the environment. But I think that what Apple has done here is genuinely noble. I mean, their pledge to cut emissions by 75% before touching a single carbon credit has happened. They're 2/3 of the way there while growing revenue 65%. It hasn't cost them much money at all. And decoupling growth from emissions is a rare corporate climate change that actually holds up. Like most companies cut emissions by shrinking, and Apple did so while almost doubling their business and throughput. That said, they have absolutely massive footprint. I mean, 15 million metric tons of CO2 in 2024 is no small number. Even halved is a small country's worth of emissions. Progress and scale are happening, and they're both true, but yeah. Here's where I get critical. Right to repair is the huge asterisk on all of this and this sustainability story. Ternus had an interesting interview with Marquez, for which Marquez was criticized a couple of years ago, on the matrix between designing for repairability and designing for longevity. And while I understand that and think that's true, a lot of crap that Apple did was just genuinely mischievous. Like parts pairing was a huge problem. Swap out a genuine Apple screen from one iPhone to another and you get nag warnings and lost features. It was so bad that state legislation started banning it. Oregon was first, but California, New Mexico, New York, Colorado, they all have similar laws. And Apple kind of resisted all of it until California introduced the bill that Apple ended up backing because it passing was inevitable. I get it. It's a tricky matrix to navigate because ultimately they do make money selling you new crap. And I guess credit where credit's due. Self-service repair launched in 2022. They use genuine parts. You can get them now, you can repair stuff, and their longevity by design document was surprisingly honest in telling you, hey, look, like we do design these to be repairable, but also the best device is one that never needs to be repaired. It's just, all of this is mired by the fact that they're dragging this through legislation and doing it almost by like malicious compliance rather than doing it so like forthrightly. And so, yeah, I'm gonna have to say this is B, maybe C. I'm putting a lot of stuff in C. Then again, they say C is the average. I wouldn't know. I was always an A student. Not really, only in college. Okay, App Store and the legal war. Ooh, this is a mess. The anti-steering fight sounds narrow until you realize that it's about whether or not Apple can tax a demand that it didn't create. Look, a developer pointing users to their own website should not require a 30% cut, and that's the whole argument. Yeah, Apple made the App Store. Yeah, that took cost, that took time, that took infrastructure, but Apple did that 15 years, 20 years ago. Like, we're past that now. And Cook era Apple pushed the App Store model harder than Jobs or Schiller or anybody else ever intended. I think Jobs saw it as a curation layer, and Cook turned it into services revenue pillar number one. Every dollar into that, $30 billion a year in App Store commissions, is why regulators finally came for them, not just in the EU, but now even here in the US. The DMA has created, I think, a fairly fragmented platform. They've now forced sideloading and third-party stores, alternative browser engines, alternative payments. Some of it is good, but some of it genuinely makes iOS worse. And Apple could have avoided it if they just didn't do this crap in the first place. Their core technology fee response was awful. It made them look so much worse, not better, and this thing has been dragged through years and years of debate with very little win for Apple. Now, I guess Epic technically lost the trial in the US, but they've won the war. I mean, Sweeney failed on antitrust, but got the anti-steering injunction, which is actually what matters to developers, and Apple's 2024 response, which was like, oh, we won't charge you 30%, you can go process payment on your own store, and we'll only take 27%. Screw you. I mean, that is so stupid. The core tension is that Apple insists that the 30% funds the platform, funds the App Store, funds the Apple Developer Program. No, it doesn't, because they charge you to become an Apple developer. The platform costs have recouped many, many times what is reasonable. It is pure rent seeking. And yeah, that's Cook's legacy, is just like gross. This is an easy F. I mean, I freaking hate the App Store. This next one is one that we don't often talk about nowadays. It was a really hot subject though when it happened, and partially because it was such an uncomfortable topic. Everybody agrees that child sexual abuse material is disgusting. It shouldn't be had by anyone, and unfortunately is had and produced by many people, including people that own iPhones and have it in their photo libraries. So Apple comes up with an idea that conceptually, principally, morally, I think is good. Why don't we scan people's image libraries, not by actually analyzing the individual photos, but by using known hashes of CSAM that exists, and then identify people that have it? Good idea, but not really, because once you start to implement it, you realize all the problems that come with this. There was a ton of backlash when Apple introduced this feature because it came from the same privacy voices that were usually defending Apple. The ETF called it a backdoor. That's your core constituency that's starting to turn on you. And yeah, it's not that the fear was CSAM. Everybody agreed that was bad. It was the precedent that it set, because once Apple had an on-device scanning infrastructure, well, every government would demand that it be pointed at other content. Apple's rare case of announcing something, it getting just absolutely flattened, universally hated by pretty much everybody, and then backing down almost never happens, but it did here. Now, the lasting effect is that Apple did use this experience to double down on end-to-end encryption for iCloud, which is good, and they also closed their scanning door by removing their own ability to see the data, which is also good. They learned from their habits, and they did implement the feature wherein if you have a children's device, the parent can be notified if known sexual abuse material content attempts to leave the device or come into the device. But that's done by basic rudimentary scanning and has to be enabled by a parent rather than enabled globally by default. This was just a disaster all the way through. Good idea, but there was just no way that the idea could be implemented smoothly, and I'm honestly shocked that they even tried. Self-service repair. We kind of touched on this a little bit because this is part of the sustainability thing, so I don't want to spend too much time on it. But it came out, frankly, out of malicious compliance. It has expanded quite a bit, and new products like the MacBook Neo take further advantage of it. This was triggered by legislation, not by principle. There is no ifs, ands, or buts about that, but I'm glad it exists now. Having said that, it exists because of malicious compliance, and the pricing sucks. Most of the time, you can get something done at the Apple Store via a Genius for cheaper than doing it on your own, and that is stupid. Manufacturing diversification. Okay, I am currently reading Patrick McGee's Apple in China. Fascinating book. It is wild how much money and effort Apple has poured into China. McGee pegs it at $55 billion per year at its peak, and estimated 3 million Chinese workers are trained by Apple engineers. More people have benefited from China, more people in China have benefited from Apple than Apple has benefited. No, what? Okay. Let's try that again. More people are indirectly employed in China by Apple than the entirety of the American populace by all Chinese companies combined. Apple didn't just use Chinese manufacturing prowess, they built it. Tim Cook built it. But I also think that Cook unfairly gets blamed for the huge China moat that's been created. It's a problem, but he didn't really have a choice. Global iPhone demand was insane, and no other country on earth could ramp up to the tens of millions of units required at Apple's tolerances and requirements. It wasn't a cost play, it was really the only place they could physically do it. And what I think makes this diversification story interesting is that Cook is, yeah, the guy that built the dependency, but he's also the one methodically undoing it. This is him correcting his own long-lasting negative legacy in real time. Part of it is because of pure tariff arbitrage that the Chinese iPhones face is 55%, I think, for US import duties versus 10% on Indian ones. And so that single number is the reason why 2025 was the inflection point, but it was the inflection point. India's making iPhones. They can't do all the hard stuff, displays, chips, cameras, that's all still made in China and Taiwan. So made in India is really kind of final assembly in India, but it is something. And with Vietnam and India and other manufacturing happen, it's a good thing. I honestly think that in the next few years, we'll see a lot of fabrication coming to the United States. I don't say coming back to the United States because we've never made this crap, but it'll be coming here for the first time as well. Part of that you can attribute to both Cook and Biden with the CHIPS Act. This is a American kind of nationalism is kind of pushing this forward, but much of it is quite literally Tim Cook. And yeah, the diversification is S tier. He gets criticized about China all the time, and I think we ought not to do that because he's one of the reasons why I think we're actually pulling out of China as fast as we possibly humanly can. And what are you going to do? Go back 20 years ago and say, yeah, no, we can't meet demand for the iPhone because we don't want to become reliant on China in 20 years. Hindsight's 2020. The Vision Pro, ooh, baby. There's an important distinction here. This is not the Apple car. Cook killed the car. He didn't kill the Vision Pro. He still talks about spatial computing as the future of computing on earnings calls, and I think it's because he genuinely believes it. This isn't sunk cost. Tim Cook believes in AR in the Vision Pro. This is his legacy. Oh, bummer. I mean, I do have to say on the record, it is the most amazing computer that I have ever used. The displays, the pass-through, the iHand input, the iSight exterior display, even though it's goofy, like nobody else is even close. It is an amazing piece of technology, but then once you use it, you're like, oh, boy howdy, has it got problems and it's lost. It has no app ecosystem. And well, sales have kind of come to a halt. Digital ads have stopped entirely. Production reportedly halted at Luxshare many months before they updated to the M5, which they did sheerly because they wanted to keep the SKU alive and were out of M2 chips. The rumored Apple glasses that are alleged to be coming are not the same product, and that needs saying loudly. They have no displays. They're spatial computers, I guess, in the same way that it can maybe be controlled by voice, but the Vision Pro is not controlled by voice. It's mostly controlled by your fingers, which the stupid glasses won't do, and that will be powered probably by Apple Intelligence. They're not the same product. Here's the thing. The Vision Pro shipped without a reason to use it every day. I said that when the friggin' keynote came out. I said this would be a problem. When everyone else said, oh no, this is going to change VR. And I said, no, it's not. This is just a regular VR headset. It has all the same problems as every other VR headset. Well, look at me. I was right. And that comes from a guy who loves VR. Having said that, Cook, I think, deserves credit and blame here because he shipped the thing He took a swing at a genuinely new computing paradigm. And people always say like, oh, Cook isn't innovative. He doesn't do anything. Like, this is a Steve Jobs level product. Now, whether or not Jobs would have shipped this remains to be seen, but you gotta give Cook credit for having the gonads to ship the thing. But yeah, it was the wrong product at the right time. I mean, the wrong product at the wrong time. And therefore, it's gotta be a C, even though I love mine and still use it. Last two, RCS on iMessage. Oh boy. Cook famously told a reporter in 2022 that if your mom can't see videos from you, buy her an iPhone. That quote aged terribly, and it probably accelerated the regulatory heat that Apple had on iMessage, because I know people overseas don't understand that, and they say, why don't you just use WhatsApp, which by the way is also owned by a company, so what's the difference? But iMessage is the messaging monopoly in the United States. And it sucked to message people in Android group chats because it would default to SMS, which is insecure, doesn't support high-resolution media, it's bad. RCS came out to fix this issue, and for years, Apple ignored it. They didn't implement it. And well, they finally did because of mounting pressure, I believe. China, frankly, was the actual forcing function. Chinese regulators required RCS to ship in all iPhones sold there. And I think since they couldn't ship a China-only SKU, they decided to just ship the whole feature globally. It's a classic Cook era kind of pattern. Resist for years and then capitulate under regulatory pressure and then claim it was always the plan. Same playbook as USB-C and the EU and the App Store crap. It's embarrassing. It's bad. It's D tier for sure. And that saves the best for last. Apple Intelligence. Oh, this is where Cook's management philosophy just completely crumbled. Cook runs his executives on, don't bring me problems, just figure it out. And that works until it doesn't. A lot of the kind of Jobs era guys like Federighi, Eddie Q, Srouji, to an extent, people that have internalized that culture over 20 years, they're fine with that, but it doesn't work for external hires, and no better external hire than Gianandrea for Apple Intelligence. He was brought from Google in 2018. He ran AI as his own fiefdom, and well, when generative AI happened, he kind of allegedly dismissed it and said that it was dumb and tried to keep building out Siri in the wrong way. Yeah. The C-suite infighting began. There was the whole report on it last year from The Information. I made a video on it, which you should see. Federighi was so furious at the AI org's pace that he ended up doing his own thing. The fact that Cook allowed that to happen, 2 parallel development tracks, is just insane. And well, now Apple Intelligence falls under Federighi. Here's the thing. I think what made this more embarrassing is that all of these features were announced at WWDC 2024. They sold the iPhone 16 on the premise that it would be the Apple Intelligence device. And yet now I'm pretty sure it will be discontinued once these features become fully available because it just does not have the on-edge memory bandwidth and memory volume to be able to handle this. They are trying to make reparations. They're trying to fix stuff. The Gemini deal is a big one. They're getting a 1.2 trillion parameter Gemini model powering the new Siri when it comes out eventually, apparently, maybe this year, sometime in iOS 27. That doesn't require them to collect data and give it back to Google. It's their own little baby model that runs on their own Apple Intelligence hardware and Apple Silicon, which is fascinating. But the optics of this are wild. I mean, Apple spent a decade marketing itself as the anti-Google privacy company, and now Google pays Apple $20 billion a year to be the default engine, and then Apple pays them for their data collection scraping tool. I mean, it's just, it's bad. Now, I can talk ad nauseum, and I'm going to in the future, about how Apple Intelligence being a failure doesn't mean that Apple is necessarily behind in AI as a whole, but AI as in Apple Intelligence is bad. The products that exist now weren't that good when they came out, and they haven't really been updated in basically 2 years. Have you tried to use Genmoji lately? Oh my gosh, it's awful. And there you have it. Cook's run. A lot of really good, a lot of kind of mid to pretty bad, and basically nothing in B tier. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know, do you think this list is all wrong? Put your own tier list in the links below. In the links below, comments below. But most importantly, and as always, stay snazzy.